Okay, well, welcome to the Natural Resources panel here. I'm excited to have all you guys here and also the students that are joining us online. So we have students connected online? Yes? Looking like it? Okay, I'm going to start by passing around this sign-in sheet. If you haven't signed in yet, please do so. This is just for the Career Development Center. We just keep track of who comes to our events and which events we want to repeat and things like that. So if you could pass that around, please. So my name is Brett Hoskins. I am the career advisor for the College of Forestry, as well as the College of Agricultural Sciences and Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. And the idea of this panel is that in fields like natural resources and environmental sciences, there's so much that you can do with that. And so we wanted to just dig into, okay, how do you find a job? And then what are some people's experiences like in the field? So it's really just a low-key conversation. Most of it is going to be just chatting with these folks about what they do and just answering your questions. But the first 10-15 minutes will be a presentation from me on job searching, advice, and tools in general. And then I want to devote the majority of the time just to your questions for the panelists. So let's start by just a quick introduction of who we have sitting up here awkwardly, while I'm going to be presenting. So here we got Sara Kelly. She's with Whole Earth Nature School. Thank you. Here we got Paul Catino, who's subbing in for Tanner Scott from Miller Timber Services. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And then we have Wendy Crowell at the end with Ash Creek Forest Management. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Any questions before we get started? All right. So let's see here. Some general job searching advice. So I think a lot of what unites people in natural resources or environmental sciences is that we all care about the environment. We care about protecting and conserving our world, nature. A lot of us like to work outside. So I think that's a lot of what draws us to natural resources. But then once we get into that, it's like, where do I go within that? And I think what can start helping you, whether you're new to the major or you're about to graduate, is to really take a look at your working personality. So we share that kind of common mission, that common desire, but like how are you wired? What do you enjoy? And so here are some questions that maybe you want to start thinking through. So one question would be, do you like to be in the outdoors? And does that include when it's cold and rainy or when it's super hot? Traipsing through the woods, does that sound like an awesome day to you? Or you're like, well, maybe I'm not so sure about that. So looking at whether the jobs out there have that outdoor component, whether that's an essential thing that you really want, or if it's something that you're not a huge fan of. The second thing, what special skills do I have that might help me? So as we talk about some of these careers, some of them might be looking for, say, like a GIS certificate. They might be looking for you to be, more like a biologist or from Fish and Wildlife. So there are a lot of specializations within natural resources. So thinking about what you have or what you might want to layer on top of that throughout schooling or with your internships to direct you in that area. So number 3, am I okay with this element of temporary and seasonal jobs? So if you're not familiar with this, a lot of times this is where you start. And if you follow people's paths through LinkedIn, a lot of times you'll see that's something you're familiar with and okay with being part of your process. It's not always going to be part of the process, but it's frequently part of it. Are you a scientist at heart? So do you have that curious streak in you? Are you an investigator? Do you want to go take samples and solve a question and then create, analyze data and report out on it? Is that how you're wired? I found personally when I went into grad school that I'm not a scientist. I love students, but not research. And so research made me miserable, which is okay because my husband is a researcher. He loves it. He's like, I had a great day today. I didn't have to talk to a single human being and I learned so many things. I'm like, great, we're wired totally differently. So thinking about like the diversity of skills and interests you might have. Are you a communicator? So a lot of times the layer of natural resources and environmental work that we don't think about is how do these systems run? So if you're working at a nonprofit, what are those jobs out there? So maybe it's volunteer coordination. Maybe it's grant funding. And so some of the skills might be less being in the woods and more writing and coming up with compelling arguments, or marketing. How do you get people to give money to your organization? So is that what you like to do? Because there's a lot to do there. It's, policy, marketing, fundraising. These are the functions that help some of these nonprofits run, or government agencies, or whatever they are. Do I like to work on a team or by myself? One of my primary drivers is working with people. The jobs that I've had where I work by myself, like my soul just dies. I can't stand it. I can't stand being by myself. But there are a ton of people that love working independently. So asking yourself that question, do I need people? If so, how much people interaction do I need to be happy in my job? So these are just some things to start thinking about. Okay, let's check on time here. So types of employers out there. This is by no means exhaustive. There are so many things that you can do in this area, but these are just some samples here. So a lot of times the jobs are going to be at federal and state and tribal agencies. So if you're looking for a place to start, what's going on at Forest Service? You probably think of Forest Service if you're in forestry, but what about Bureau of Land Management, or Department of Fish and Wildlife, or the Natural Resources Conservation Service? There might be these kind of peripheral fields that you might not think about as much. For instance, NRCS, your job might be to work with growers and go out to their farm and look at their natural resources and take samples and give them recommendations on how to conserve water or whatever it might be. So that's like more of an agricultural notion, but it's still natural resources. So thinking about what agencies are out there. A lot of times tribal organizations have some great jobs in this area, and you might not think of those. So if you know where you're going to live or where you want to live, like maybe you want to live in Roseburg, okay, maybe the Umpqua tribe of Indians might be a place to work there. So that's some place to look too, is if you could figure out a location and then figure out what agencies are active in your area. But don't also forget about local government. There are park services at the county level, at the city level, and there are public works departments and things like that where there might be jobs that might appeal to you. Forestry industry companies, nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, policy, educational institutions. This is just a very quick overview of some of the places to look. So a few tools for you. Where did I set down my water bottle? So I don't. Anybody see a blue water bottle? Oh, it's on that desk over there. Hang on. I know my throat will dry out. Okay, so tools that you might want to think about. Focus 2. Has anybody here heard of or used Focus 2? All right, nice work, Zach. So Focus 2, if you're kind of new to the career exploration process, or if you're just trying to kind of confirm what you want to do, it's a really helpful tool. It's a self-assessment tool. You do these different work interest assessments, values assessments, leisure assessments. And it's fun too. It's like you on a 1 to 5 stars, how interested would you be in designing a commercial? And you say, okay, that sounds like 2 stars or whatever it is. And then it syncs up with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it'll give you a list of like, okay, you might be interested in these 15 careers. And then you can click on, okay, what does a natural resources specialist do? And it'll tell you what they do, salary, job growth, the types of working conditions. So this is a really good research tool. So I would point you to Focus 2 if you're wanting to kind of do a little bit of assessment stuff. LinkedIn. So I'm sure you've heard of LinkedIn, and I could give a whole presentation on LinkedIn, which I'm not going to do. But one thing I wanted to point out to you is the alumni search. Okay? So if you search for Oregon State University on LinkedIn and then go to their alumni button, it'll pull up 122,000 beavers on LinkedIn. But you can then search for natural resources, environmental sciences, whatever your major is, and it'll say, okay, there's 1,000 of these guys running around. And then you can click on a person and see what is their path. How did they do that? Or maybe they work at a company you really want to work at. So then you can reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a fellow beav, you're the fellow beav, like let's talk, let's, what advice do you have for me, or could we get together and chat? So I just picked a random person on LinkedIn in natural resources who started out with a degree in environmental sciences, then started doing some seasonal park work, and then now they work for Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation District. And so you can just see other people's paths. What are your classmates doing? And that might help answer that question for you. Any questions so far? I'm moving through this stuff pretty quickly so we can get to the panelists. But okay. Here is another fun tool that nobody ever knows about, and I wish I knew about it when I was job searching. It's called BuzzFile, and it is just an employer indexing service. So the nice thing is you can be from anywhere that you're at. So some of our eCampus students, for example, let's say you're tuning in from Colorado. You can go to BuzzFile Employers by Major, and you can say, Fort Collins, and you can look at the companies associated with that major. So let's say this is environmental sciences. I just pulled this through. And you can look at the companies listed there, and they're organized by size of employers, which is really helpful because when you're Googling this stuff, that's not super easy to figure out. So this is just a little sample here. Employers by major in Oregon, environmental services. So EcoTrust, EPA, Department of Environmental Quality. And this can be really helpful to just figure out, okay, what are my top employers in my area where I want to live? And then you can work on networking with those. So it's a good way to kind of narrow down who are the players in this field. So most people don't know about BuzzFile. It's not an OSU tool. I am not endorsing all the information on it. In fact, if you find a company you like, I recommend then going to that company's website and finding the real information. It's literally just crawling the web and pulling in this information and sorting it by major. But it's really helpful. Okay, who here is using Handshake? Yes, good, good. Rachel's using Handshake. She's from the Career Center. All right. So Handshake is our one-stop career place on campus. So this is where you can find thousands of jobs. It's where you can apply. It's where you can register for career fairs. It's where you can make appointments with your career advisor in your college, which is me. I've met with some people in this room, but know that that's a resource for you, whether you're a freshman or a PhD, anything between. There are career advisors that can help you walk through and do some of this more specific job searching. So know that that is a resource to you as well. And my final point, please network. It's a really good idea. And I know that that can seem really intimidating because you're like, I have to know somebody on the inside of the company, but there's a lot of ways to do this. For example, you guys came to this today. So make time to talk to the panelists afterwards and to say hey, talk with them. And if they're doing something that is interesting to you, maybe you follow up with them in email and say hey, I'm doing this, could I, like we talked about, whatever that thing is, just follow up. So we do a ton of stuff on campus, career fairs, workshops like this. If you're the person that walks up afterwards and actually connects with the employer, that can be really valuable. That's actually how I got my first job when I was an undergrad, is I had a speaker come to my class, and she was at a public relations firm, and it sounded interesting. I didn't know what public relations was, but it sounded interesting. So I talked to her after class, and then I called the company, and I asked about an informational interview. And I said, hey, I spoke to Annette Nemitz. She came to my class. It sounded really interesting. What are you guys doing with interns? And so then I came in for an informational interview, which is basically like a pre-interview where you're not trying to interview for a job. You're more just introducing yourself to the company and asking them questions, and they're asking you questions. But then by the time a position came open, they knew who I was. That's the whole point of networking, is just to meet the company in some way. So if you are job searching and applying, don't let the computer be a barrier between you and the employer. A lot of people do this. They go, I need to apply through the job board. That's all I can do. My hands are tied. I've applied. But that human element is so important. So if you're the person who maybe before you apply, you call up the company, you say, hey, I saw this position. I have a few questions. Do you have a few minutes to talk with me? And then they say, oh, I spoke to Carl the other day. When they see your resume come through, they're going to pay more attention to you. Or if you're the person that follows up after you apply and you say, hi, I wanted to check in on the status of interviews. You don't want to be a pest, obviously, but just being present and having the employers know your name can really help. And also you have a ton of existing connections, career advisors, professors, friends, parents, coworkers that can connect you with jobs. And so think about those as well. So that is my super rapid advice on job searching presentation. Any questions on this content? Yes.
I want from online.
Yes.
Someone that wasn't able to see the full presentation, will this be posted later?
I can share the slides out to anybody that attended afterwards. Yeah.
Would you recommend calling and asking questions to employers specifically, or also to like programs and internships?
So, what do you mean?
Like you said that you should probably call if you see a position, you might want to get to know the company, so you might want to call beforehand to like ask some questions or something, so they know your name, so that when your resume comes in, they pay attention to you. So would you recommend doing that, not just for jobs, but also for internships, fellowships, stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say every company is different. And so their comfort level with doing this kind of thing is going to really vary. So if on their website they say no phone calls, please, respect that. But like especially like smaller companies, you know, they might respect you just stopping by and just saying, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself, I was driving by. Whereas like a big company, there might be multiple layers, and so you might be dealing with a recruiter, and for them, it's their job to do this stuff. So they're very open to that, they're very used to it. It just really depends on the company. So figure out kind of what their vibe is and how open they are. But I mean, if in doubt, I say err on the side of reaching out in a very polite and respectful way. And if they say, we don't have time, you say, sorry about that, thanks so much. But it really makes a huge difference. 85% of jobs are gotten through some type of networking. You knew somebody, made some connection, they knew you somehow. So keep that in mind. Yeah.
As far as like to be able to have like a reasonable expectation that you might end up doing a lot of temp seasonal jobs, is there much in terms of like temp seasonal jobs in the fall and winter? Like because this feels like most of the ones I've seen are concentrated in warm weather. Is there much in the cooler months?
That might be a question I'm going to direct to the panelists. I tend to see what you're saying as well. There tends to be more in the summer, but I think it depends on the field. So if it's agriculture, yeah, there's a lot of temp seasonal, you know, things like that. So I would direct that to the panelists when we start that. No. Yeah. Okay, so with that, we're going to turn it over to the panelists. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to repeat your questions into the mic so that on-campus or eCampus students can hear it. And then panelists, if I could have you speak into the microphone, you won't hear yourself amplified, but it's going into the online student feed. So let's start with a quick introduction for each of you. Tell us, repeat your name and just a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis. And then I'm going to tack on to that, how did you get to where you are? So it might be a kind of a longer intro, and then we'll go to questions here. So starting with Sarah.
Sure.
Yeah?
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. So my name's Sara Kelly. I am the outdoor school director for Whole Earth Nature School. I started in this position in December of last year, and I am a recent grad from OSU. I actually defended my master's presentation. It was not a thesis in this room. Back in May of 2018. Prior to, and I'll say my degrees, I guess. So my bachelor's degree is in communications with a focus on public relation and world cultures and literature, which sounds like not at all related to what I'm doing right now, but I'll tell you why it's related later. And my master's degree is in environmental humanities, which for a lot of people, they're like, what does that mean, environmental humanities? What do you do with that? My project specifically was focused on incorporating environmental ethics into outdoor education, and I ran a field trip program at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, which is about an hour and a half or so from here. My job, I love that question. Day to day, what does your job look like? It's totally different every day, all the time. So if you like always having to be on your toes and respond to crazy situations all the time, administration is a good place to do that. I'm more an administrator than I am an outdoor educator, but I've kind of run the gamut with those jobs. I know I'm talking a lot, but
No, you're good. Go for it.
I'll say very briefly my path, and then I'll move on to the next panelist. So let's see. I worked in a child care center. That's probably the most related thing where I first started out in education. I did not like kids, by the way, when I was like a high school student. I never thought I would be in education. I was a performer. I sang and danced, and I thought that that's where I was going to go. I needed to do something creative. And I realized that all my friends were doing education. I was like, no, that's not for me. I don't want to deal with kids. And then I ended up, my first job out of high school was working in a child care center. I was like, oh, I actually like kids. Well, shoot, maybe I could have gone that education route with music and dance. And I was like, no, I have no idea what to do with my life. It's okay if you're still in that boat and about to graduate, because most of us still don't know what we want to do with our lives. Okay. But I decided that I really wanted to focus on something that would make a difference, which sounds really cliche and vague, but I wanted to do something that would impact a lot of people in a positive way. So I interned for a nonprofit, an environmental nonprofit, where I did public relations work and environmental consulting for really large events to kind of bring down the waste. So I kind of got into environmental education through sustainability. I then volunteered and just like started showing up to a lot of sustainability events that was happening on my campus a couple years after graduation. With a degree in communications and no background in environmental science, I was running the sustainability program at the University of Houston, where I graduated with my degree. I loved that job. It was awesome. It had a lot of different responsibilities, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I decided to give it all up, including my awesome salary, and come be a student again and work in the office as an administrative assistant in this very building. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did I go from running a program to being an administrative assistant? And the point to that is, like, whatever you want to do, like, you should follow it and stay on that path. And you're not going to get it instantly. It's not going to come to you easily. But if you're really passionate about it and you network and you meet the right people, you can get there. And now I'm running an outdoor school program in Oregon, which is awesome. Never thought, like 5 years ago, I would be doing that. So that's a little snippet, I guess.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, so my name's Paul, and as has been mentioned, I'm standing in for Tanner, and I'm actually pretty familiar with Tanner's job because we're really good friends, and he just graduated and we had a couple classes together and we fight fire together over the summer. So he's doing controlled burning, and they had a burn that slipped over, so he wasn't able to make it tonight. So randomly I was here, and so I'm going to try to provide some insight into that career path, and I'm kind of on the same career track. So I joined the military out of high school. I served in the Marine Corps, and then after that I worked in environmental education and basically natural resource education, doing outdoor schools and things like that, and working with the park system, doing basically like leading service projects and outdoor restoration projects. And then I was teaching a lot about the Native Americans of the Willamette Valley and how they burned, and I got really interested in fires, and so I decided to go ahead and start school. So right now I'm a sophomore with a double major in forest management and forest restoration, fire, and a leadership minor. I also have my own company that I do fuels reductions and pre-commercial thinning. And I work with people from Oregon Department of Forestry and NRCS that do grants for private landowners. So that's a lot of the clientele that I work with. And pretty familiar with the career track of going down fuel specialist route. And that's kind of where I'm trying to head, is basically doing large scale, landscape scale fuels reductions and forest restoration to try to basically reintroduce fire regimes in natural landscapes and try to create healthy forests with the use of fire as a tool. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm Wendy. I'm with Ash Creek Forest Management. I'm our staff ecologist. I've been with the company for like 8 years or so. And my day-to-day, similarly, changes frequently, and it's really seasonally driven. So my job isn't seasonal, but the work that we do changes with each season. So right now, I'm in the middle of wetland delineations, cattle grazing projects. Those are kind of my big two at the moment. And then just other random monitoring projects and working with crews on some of our field work. Let's see, I guess my path is a little bit more straightforward. The business I work for is actually, it's a family business, and I was pretty determined to never work for this company because I don't know, it was a rebellious teenage thing. I was like, I'm never going to do that. And so I actually went to the University of Oregon. I majored in English. I was going to teach high school, or I was going to be a journalist. And so that's what I did after college. I moved to South Georgia, worked for a paper for a while, and decided that that was really not my thing. And so I moved back up here, and while I was kind of looking for work here, fell back in with a family business just as a temporary, started working on our ground crews, and just absolutely fell in love with it. I had to do a lot of self-teaching, learning in the field, and so I was on the ground crews for about 3 years, and then stepped into project management, and also working on recruiting and hiring. And then over the past probably 3 years or so, I've kind of moved away from being tied to specific projects, and I'm doing sort of more ecology consulting for our company in general. So working with some of our project managers on the sites that they're managing, and then working with clients who are either in the planning phases of habitat restoration projects, or working with state agencies and monitoring and all of that. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Can we give a round of applause for our panelists coming in today? Appreciate you guys. One thing that I forgot to pass around, if it's helpful, because we just briefly mentioned working for federal and state agencies. This is just a tip sheet for how to apply to those kinds of jobs. So take one if you're interested and pass it around if you haven't seen it before. I just like people to know that the federal job application is tricky and different. And if that's your path, just know that there's some extra considerations that you should have. So let's start digging into our questions. We can start with the first question we have, which I'll repeat for eCampus students. Basically, tell us about the nature of seasonal work that you guys have experienced. Any tips or advice on that, and specifically whether seasonal work can happen throughout the year and those temporary positions, or whether it's more summer focused. And it could be one panelist answer question. Some of them might be all three panelists. So feel free to direct to certain panelists if you guys would like.
So I can speak a little bit to the seasonal nature of work. So my company is focused as much as we can on providing full-time year-round work for our crews, which is not typical in the industry, at least private sector restoration. We have experimented with seasonal positions, and what we found typically is that people are available in spring and summer, typically people who are in college who are looking into natural resources jobs. And so that's when we focused on our, seasonal hiring. That said, we're always looking for people in the fall and the winter. Those are some of our busiest seasons. So, if we were to find that folks were available at those times, we would absolutely be looking. And so if that's something that you're interested in, again, networking, reaching out to companies is a great way for them to know that, hey, you're available.
I realized I forgot to mention in my introduction exactly what I do with Miller. So I'm in my third season as a wildland firefighter. So I'm a firefighter type 1, which basically is a qualification that allows you to serve as a squad leader on a typical hand crew. So Tanner has just gotten certified as a crew boss or a single engine boss, and I'm kind of working towards those qualifications. So the nature of wildland fire is obviously pretty seasonal, particularly in the West. But recently, the guys that work full time for Miller are starting to have those shoulder seasons extended a lot. So last year they deployed as early as March. They went over and spent about 30 days or something in Michigan, and were fighting a fire over there. And then as late as November, they were down in California, and even into, like, we get calls over winter break. So that it's seasonal, and it sort of changes depending upon the weather and conditions and things like that. But there also is work within Miller Timber. They have like the wildland fire section, and then they also have they do pre-commercial thinning, which is basically going in and timber stands that were planted, 10 to 25 years ago, just going in with chainsaws, or they're starting to develop more and more machinery to do that type of work, and basically thinning those trees out, removing about half of them so that they can continue to grow in a nice straight vertical trunk for timber production. So Miller Timber has invested into a lot of machinery as well. So a lot of guys, they do fire during the summer, and then they'll go and they'll operate the ponces during the winter, or they'll operate chainsaw during the winter. And so that's kind of good, because you can't really do the harvesting during the summer because of the chainsaw and machinery. There's issues with starting fires. And so a lot of the guys in the company, they actually find full-time work. And then in terms of government agencies, because obviously we're coming from a private, but there's a lot of abilities with the Forest Service they'll actually deploy you over to the East Coast, where they're doing, fire season is over. Or they're doing controlled burning during the winter. Like Florida does a ton of controlled burning all winter. So like someone that I used to work with, they would spend the entire winter over in Florida, and then come back and be working fires during the summer here. And then also with fuels reduction, so that's kind of fire suppression. But then when you're talking the controlled burning, there's these kind of windows within the spring and fall where controlled burning can be done. So that sort of dictates these seasonal availabilities of work. But most companies, the private companies, they'll either kind of bring you on conditionally that you're seasonal, or if you're interested in working for them like Miller, they try to do a really good job of providing that full-time work for everybody year round if they're wanting to commit to the company.
So outdoor or environmental educators, typically, if you're on the ground working with students, you're going to be working seasonally for the most part. The exception to that would be for our organization in particular. We do run after school programs year round. We also run winter break and spring break camps. That's pretty rare. You normally would be seeing an organization who runs summer camps predominantly. With the passing of Measure 99, which allowed all 5th or 6th graders to go to outdoor school and be funded to go to outdoor school in the state, that means that there's a lot more openings for outdoor educators in the state. Those programs typically run in the spring for the most part, but there are more programs that are ramping up to start fall seasons. If you are interested in environmental education, I would say you probably are going to start out in a seasonal position like that, or you could have a full-time job and you could volunteer. That is another great way to network, and it is a way to almost guarantee that if you do a good job, you will get a job with the organization when an opening comes up. And the other thing is, like, coming back to my earlier comment, you're not going to get your dream job immediately. Like, the reality is it's probably not going to happen. So be happy with whatever you do get out of college, and like think about, okay, even though I don't like this, how can I apply this to what I actually want to do? How can I look at this as a transferable skill? And what do I want to do in my spare time to help me get to that point to where I can get to that job, and be okay with that? And like, really, like, I was in a position where immediately after college, I hated my job, and I was like, how can I get out of here? But I started volunteering, and that really helped me to feel fulfilled in what I was doing. And now, like, as an outdoor school director, I started out of college doing communications work for a university. And actually, I use the skills that I learned there in my job today. The other way you wouldn't be doing seasonal work as an outdoor educator is you would be in a position like mine, where you're mostly in front of a laptop, but you are running programs. You're able to actually develop the curriculum. You're able to train the instructors, and you can carve out time and find a way to be outside more. Like maybe you're doing evaluations of instructors, or you're dedicating, a certain day or something where you will actually be the instructor running the program. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Other questions? So right here.
I have a question, mostly for Sarah. With similar fields to yours, where you have components of communication and sustainability, what do you see as far as like undergraduate degrees? So if you don't have a graduate degree, where can you go? Like, is the administrative door open, or less so? Does it depend on your skill set?
Just to repeat the question for on campus. So I don't need to repeat questions for on campus? Okay. Oh, great. Cool. Go ahead.
Great question. So in my various roles, like when I was managing a sustainability program and now as outdoor school director, I'm also doing recruiting and hiring. And I think it like Britt said earlier, it really depends on the organization. For me, I don't care what your degree is in. Like, I want to know that you're dedicated to the work that you're doing. I want to know that you are passionate about the job and that you're willing to learn and you can learn quickly. And I think for some jobs, like you really need that degree, like you really need that specific skill set. I think in sustainability, outdoor education, communications, as long as you have something somewhat related, which I could make an argument for almost any degree being related to the field, and you have that other experience, you're showing that you're trying, that you really want that job, you will be okay. Like, that said, I ran a sustainability program and I had a communications degree. I was up against people with PhDs in environmental sciences, and they said that they hired me because I was personable and I fit the position. I fit what they needed. So sometimes you might be the perfect fit. You might have that perfect degree and all the experience, but you might not be right for the culture. And rather than getting upset about that, I think you should see it as a blessing, because you don't want to be in a place where you wouldn't fit that culture too. So I think culture is just as important, and your personality, as what your actual academic background and job experiences are. Yeah.
Let's take a question from online.
This question is from Haley, and it's for anyone on the panel. What was the most rewarding thing you did to help find your career path?
So like I said, I was in the Marine Corps first, and then I really took a couple years and I held off from school for a long time. And I actually worked, I loved the fact that seasonal jobs kind of provided this opportunity to, it's almost structured that you can try a lot of things. Because then a lot of times out of school, it's like you want to start a job and you don't want to leave in 6 months because that looks bad in a way. But the seasonal jobs helped me to really jump from a lot of different things. And I remember I was teaching agricultural stuff. I was really interested in urban agriculture and sustainability. And then it developed more into ecology, and then it developed more into like natural history and the landscape. And that was when I discovered fuels. And I remember thinking like, this is it. And so I really enjoyed that I was able to test all of those different things. And then when I did finally get here, I felt, wow, I'm really where I belong. Like, this is something I'm super passionate about, very interested in, and just having spent all that time and having tried a lot of other things, it makes me feel like I'm not missing out on anything else, because here I am and I really know that I like this, and I'm very engaged with my education now. So
Yeah, I think that's a theme that's coming up, and I think sometimes it can feel very paralyzing when you're leaving school, like you have to figure out this job that you're going to do for 20 years. The reality of being a millennial or a Gen Z person is a lot of times you do a job for a year or two, and then you transition to another job, so it's not like a life sentence. So I hope that gives you some freedom to just try some things and just start getting those internships, those experiences, volunteering, and you're not locked in forever. A lot of times you'll see a lot of variability in people's paths. So next question.
Could I actually touch
Yeah.
One more thing on that. I used to work a lot with volunteers, and one of the biggest things I always advocated for was going out and trying to find as many volunteer opportunities as you can. And I also lead a student club on campus, and one of the things that I keep preaching to them is that go do your degree and finish it and do a great job, but then really focus on all of these other things that you're engaging in. So like, for example, I got experiential learning funds to go do the Ashland Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, which is with the Nature Conservancy. And I know a friend who had done an internship with them. So I'm kind of going to see if is prescribed fire really the cool thing that I'm interested in, or is it limited by the seasonality and the government agencies is generally who you have to work for to do prescribed fire, and there's a lot of red tape associated with it. So I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm really interested in this, but I'm going to go try it out while I'm in school. And then maybe if I don't like that, maybe I'll get this opportunity to go work with a consulting forester who does a lot of stuff specializing in fuels, and also kind of listening to Tanner and what his feedback is on, because Tanner sort of got this he almost created a job with Miller Timber by doing his degree specializing in fire ecology. So they're opening up an entire section within their company specialized in kind of what Tanner's interested in. So he's out bidding now doing oak restoration project, which is something that's totally new to Miller because they're very focused on timber production in Douglas fir. So now they're opening up this fuels and restoration thing that's almost centered around him. So kind of really getting your foot into a lot of places and just checking things, and that kind of just ties right back into the networking thing. So
questions? Yeah, I saw the hand in the back first.
This is to everybody here because I guess the question is you did not get like degrees specializing to what you wanted to do. What I hear is that you didn't like outright know what you wanted to do since high school sort of deal. So how were you how were you treated? Did you have to jump through a lot of hurdles to get where you are, or how were you perceived as someone who didn't necessarily for whom it wasn't the purpose of your life to go do this job, if that makes sense?
So that question fits exactly what I did. The crew that I started on, probably about half of them came in with a specific, either a natural resources degree, something a little bit more pertaining to natural sciences. I had an English degree. One of the other guys on the crew had a philosophy degree. Somebody else had like filmmaking or something else that was a little bit more artsy, I guess. And what I've found over the past 8 years is that there really isn't a substitute for on-the-ground experience. The degree, I mean, I'm sure that it boosted them, and there are definitely things that you get out of classroom learning, but at least in the field of habitat restoration, there isn't a substitute for working with the plants and getting to know them on the ground. You can look at 100 pictures, but you don't, I mean, it's hard to really see it until you're handling it, and you handle it 500,000 times, and it's like, I know that plant because I've seen it. So I guess I had an experience that was really open and welcoming, and I know that that's not always the case for people that I've worked with, either coming from other places, but I think that I think if you're willing to work hard and you're enthusiastic about the work, and you're ready to get out there and learn, it's not just unskilled labor. So you can get out there and you can learn a lot just being on the ground.
And I would add to that, a lot of this comes into like how you position yourself on your resume. So how do you draw out those experiences? A lot of times I see resumes where students, they really like list like, okay, I worked at McDonald's, I did this thing, I had this degree. It's like, great, that stuff's all good. But like what the employer wants to see like right away when they're looking at that resume is how do you relate to them? So if you volunteered, you want to make that volunteering experience really big and right up there and talk about exactly what you did and how you identified the plants and all the things that they're going to want to know. Or if you took some classes in that, you might want to list like relevant courses. If you've done projects, if you did like this awesome restoration project. Treat that like a job. Like, restoration project, did the site evaluation, and like put the bulk of your resume there, because I see a lot of resumes that are not related to the employer. So it doesn't always have to be the job. Sometimes you can draw out those other experiences and highlight those and be like, and prove to them that you can do that job, even if it doesn't seem like you're a natural fit. Yeah.
As a hiring manager, I know when you've targeted your resume to my position, and I will put you above a lot of other people if you do that. I know it takes a lot of time. That is what I do. If there's a job you really want, it is worth the time to prepare and research the organization and target your resume. When I did the sustainability position, I didn't have one job that I could put down that was directly related to managing a sustainability program at a university. I had done some stuff as a student. I had done projects. So I created a functional resume and I told them all the awesome things that I accomplished. And rather than focusing on roles, I focused on things that I actually did. And that was something that set me apart from other candidates. I also had a personal relationship with several people who were in charge of hiring. So networking definitely does help you get jobs. And if you don't already have that relationship, establish one. Call them, email them, tell them why you want the position. And I know I'm not supposed to be talking about like resume stuff, but as a hiring manager, if I put optional on a position, like it's optional for you to send me your resume or it's optional for you to send me a cover letter, that's a test. I really want you to send me all those things. I want to know that like you're going to put in the work just like you would if I hired you, that you were going to put in the work.
I think that's pretty universal. I've heard that from other employers as well. That's a little test. Optional is not actually optional. I think there was a question over here. Yeah.
I'm kind of combine two of my questions, so it might be sort of long-winded. But so we were talking about learning on the job, and I was wondering when you had moments where you need to learn a new skill or something you didn't have a background in, what was sort of the expectations of like quality of work that maybe depended on that skill, or the environment of how you were able to learn that? Like, was there sufficient time for like being able to Google what you need to do or something like that? And then I guess kind of to tie in with that, is there any skill? You guys have a diverse background, so that's cool. Like, is there any skill that you would find you found like specifically useful that you learned in school or the military or in prior experience, or something that maybe isn't useful at all? Just kind of skip it.
I can start off on that one. So I was going to try to put this into the last answer, but it kind of got answered collectively. But that if you're not super passionate about a job, there's a lot of character things that will come through and that you can really utilize that job, even if it's like that it's a stepping stone kind of job. Making every effort to not show that. And then there's all of these work ethic and character skills that are associated with, even if you don't like a job, it's almost like that's a skill to build in itself, that, man, I got to do this for a year and I'm going to try to get as much as I can out of it, even though I'm not really enjoying it, and just leave nobly and finish that job well. So I think that, and you kind of touched on that with the resume thing, where it's like everything you can translate an experience from something. So, the ability to work in conditions that are unenjoyable, or the ability to stick through a project that's stressful or that is complicated, or something that I thought it was going to take this long, but it ended up taking this long. So I really think that some of those hard skills that are kind of like life skills, like being adaptable, being somebody that's enthusiastic and willing to deal with adversity well, and somebody who's willing to be flexible, and somebody who's willing to be patient and excited to learn more, and those types of things. If you're slow to learn to identify the plants, a mentor will work with you a lot more than someone who comes on board and is maybe already thinks they know it all, or is like, well, I got a degree and I need more responsibility than this. And so I think that kind of humble and respectful approach, and just being enthusiastic and excited to be there and putting your best foot forward, and no matter what you're doing, would be my advice on that.
Very quickly. I loved your answer. I think my answer would have been very similar. I just want to add, like, vulnerability for me has been the biggest thing. And a lot of times when you feel a little out of place, or like you just need to like be confident and like, I got this, like, don't worry, I'll figure it out. Just be vulnerable and like ask for help and find someone to, like you said, like be humble and find that mentor, find someone who can help you with that. And if you're doing your job and you're trying your hardest, then they're not going to like look down at you for not knowing how to do something. If anything, they're going to be like, wow, that was really awesome that you were so transparent about what you still need to learn, and you were so vulnerable about that. So I think for me, I fell into that trap of just like, I totally have this, and like, I'm so confident. And when I actually like just stepped away from it and was vulnerable, it always worked out way better for me, which I thought the opposite would happen.
Pretty much covered it.
Okay, awesome. Let's take one from online.
What has surprised you most about working in the field or industry, good or bad?
A surprise. You were surprised by that question.
I do not get to work outside as much as I want to. And I kind of knew that going into it, but yeah, I think the more that you work up in this field, depending on what you're doing, but particularly in environmental education or program development, if you're working at a nonprofit, like the more you work up, the more you're going to be in an office, in front of a laptop, doing that kind of work. And that kind of hurts my soul a little bit, because I really am in this field because I love being outside and I want to protect the environment and I want people to care about it and I want to like go do fun things outside with kids, and I don't always get to do that. So that's a little upsetting.
I can speak towards the fuels work and forest restoration. I remember when I first started going to school that someone told me, well, if you want to work for the government for the rest of your life, go do wild and fire. And I was pleasantly surprised at how many different avenues there are if you get the experience in wild and fire. So you can work for the Nature Conservancy, you can work for tribes. The Forest Stewards Guild is opening up new jobs that are really cool, that involve working with youth and training up young people to be working in wild and fire modules that are specific to restoration work. There's a lot of private companies that are starting to open up this door where they're realizing that there's a lot of work to be done in fuels reduction. And so I was also pleasantly surprised by the number of people that I've met that are really pretty attuned to the fact that we need to be innovative in addressing issues with forestry right now. So that was a pleasant surprise for me, was finding that there is really a lot out there, and you don't need to put blindfolders on and have to go work for a Forest Service hand crew if you get involved in wild and fire and fuels work. So
I guess just kind of tagging onto that and not having blinders, so many facets of this industry are so young, and there's so much opportunity for innovation and development. And the way that my company does restoration now is completely different than we were running it 15 years ago. And so I think, it's a great field to get into if you want to really think critically about the way that we manage our environment and the way that we interact with our environment. So it's always surprising to me year to year to just see how much we're learning as an industry and how quickly things are changing and developing.
So we're starting to wrap up on our time here. So let's take a couple more questions, and maybe we'll do kind of shorter answers so we can get a few more in. And yeah, so over here.
Oh boy, now I just spaced on what my question was. Oh no. You can go to the next person and see if I can remember it.
Yeah, so many questions. Yeah, right here.
So touching on what you just mentioned, thinking critically, what are some of the experiences that were the best for you to kind of develop those skills rather than like regurgitating maybe what you learned in class, even though you had different, not necessarily environmental science backgrounds? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Think about it for a second. I think that, part of it is, so I've always been a very detail-oriented person, so it's been a learning experience for me to kind of step outside of the details and look at the big picture. But I think that that's a lot of what it is. And so it's not necessarily, looking at one particular treatment and the result that you're hoping to get, but it's stepping back and kind of looking at, why are we trying to do this? And, if it's a natural process that we're trying to replicate, like really stepping back to, before things were as severely impacted as they are now, for example. I guess just like a quick example is some of the grazing programs that we're getting up and started right now. It's about prairie management, and it's looking at, I guess, cost-effective ways to manage prairies. And traditionally, it's been a regime of mowing. It's been a regime of, herbicide application. When we're lucky, it's been a regime of burning, but, now we're thinking about different ways to make things a little bit more cost effective. In urban areas, it's about, not necessarily being able to use fire when we want to use fire. And so looking at the result that you're hoping to achieve and kind of coming up with a different way to get there, I guess.
Great. Do we have one from online?
So this may have been mentioned, but what is the most appropriate way to contact organizations for volunteer or internship opportunities? Call, email, walking in, or old-fashioned Pony Express?
How can people contact your organizations?
I would say that trying to catch them at a career workshop or something is probably the best route. If you can do that and show up and present yourself with what your skill set is and what you're interested in and really have a smile and a good handshake and stuff. And then alternatively, I'd say a lot of people use email nowadays. And if they take a week to get back to you, just being patient about it because they're busy. So email is probably a really good opportunity.
A lot of organizations now have volunteer coordinators, or maybe they have someone who does fundraising. A lot of times they'll be involved in the volunteerism as well. So I would say trying to find that person, because people are busy, and if you email and call them, a lot of times they're not going to get back to you. So that probably means you emailed or called the wrong person. So keep trying until someone responds, and I'm sure they would love to have you as a volunteer.
Let's go over by about 5 minutes, I think, and just because there's a lot of questions out there, I want to get to a few more. So who has had their hand up for a while that maybe I didn't see? Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I remembered. Do you have any advice for, like, a lot of the job postings that I've seen start before, like, I graduate, before, like, I'm technically, like, available to start a job? Do you have any advice as far as should you still apply for that job and communicate that? Like, would you think that reduces your likelihood of getting the position?
Very specific example, yes, absolutely still apply. Because even if you applied, they might say something like, well, we're going to do our due diligence to interview all the applicants, and if you end up being the right one, we'll work with you. So yes, absolutely apply. And even if you're not the right one that year, or if the time conflict is a really big issue, then the next year they're like, awesome, remember you. So yes, still apply.
Hiring takes a really long time. I almost never get to hire someone when I want to. So yeah, even if you can't start when we want you to start, you might still start when you can, and that might be the soonest available time anyway. So
A lot of times we find that employers are fairly flexible unless they have like a cohort model where everybody's starting at the same time. Like, I'm Disney, I have 15 interns and they'll start at this time. But a lot of employers will work with you on that stuff. And Oregon State is a little tricky with how we get out. So I would always encourage you, I would echo that to reach out. Questions? Yeah.
Are there ways to volunteer or get an internship with your specific organizations? What are
Yes.
they? Yeah.
Come talk to me and I will tell you, and then we can send it all to people via email. I don't know about you guys, but I imagine the same thing is true.
Miller, they do internships. Most of them are paid, so they kind of expect a little bit more commitment from people. But there are basically seasonal internships. So
we don't do volunteer positions, but we've done internships in the past.
I've been missing you in the front row, I think. What was your question?
Hi, yeah, I had a question for Wendy. I guess,
have you experienced maybe challenges with being a woman in the field or having a background that's not actually like the environmental science base? Like, has that been a challenge for you working with other, with delegating or working with other managers?
I would say sometimes. I've done a lot just in my own time to kind of fill that education gap. So I've taken, several courses through PSU. I've hold certifications through the Landscape Contractors Board and ODA. So I've put in some time to kind of build that like on paper resume. And then I guess just as far as being a woman in this field, I think there are times when I will be like the only woman at a conference or in a room or on a crew. And I've never had a problem with that, but it certainly is something to be prepared for, I guess. Yeah.
Any last questions? Yeah.
This is for Wendy. What were the classes that you went and took that you just couldn't live without?
So I guess most recently I went through the basic wetland delineation program. A lot of this stuff, like I've mentioned before, you can self-teach it and you can learn a lot in the field, but it definitely gives you a leg up on certain things. So yeah, wetland delineation, the landscape contractor's license, typically it's a 2-year program. That's one that I just kind of self-taught on my own time and then took the test. So to hold that certification, and then I guess through ODA, it was just kind of all of the different herbicide application licensures there. Those are the ones that I can think of. Oh, and then project management courses as well through PSU.
Any last question? Yeah.
Paul? So for someone who doesn't have a degree in like natural resources or forestry or necessarily a degree at all, is there a way to get into Miller Timber? Just asking for a friend.
Yeah, most of the jobs at Miller Timber are non-degree based. Without relevant experience. Yeah, wild and fire is sort of a notorious thing for people. As long as you're willing to work hard, you can get into it. In terms of moving up very far, that's where you're going to kind of find a ceiling. But it's certainly pretty easy to get involved in wild and fire as long as you're physically capable of doing the work. It's a very much a need-based thing. And then, like with Miller, I know guys that are becoming crew bosses and making careers out of it and have never gone to school, and they kind of make fun of guys like me and Tanner, but we'll be their bosses here in a couple years. So.
Great. Cool. Well, I would, again, encourage you guys, if you have additional questions for these folks, to come up and talk to them afterward. For eCampus, if you're looking to connect with one of these companies, you can email me, so britt.hoskins@oregonstate.edu, and just let me know how you're wanting to connect with the panelists, and I can maybe help you figure out the right person to talk to. But otherwise, thanks everybody for coming, and if you could give one more round of applause for our panelists, I'd appreciate that. And I will share the slides out with everybody that attended.